Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into the shocking story of Rick Harrison, the star of Pawn Stars. From being beloved to confessing his horrific crimes in court, let's see how he went from a TV star to a real-life killer. Rick Harrison, the Pawn Stars star, caused an uproar when he admitted to his criminal activities in court. From being a family man figure, he became a notorious criminal, completely changing the public's perception of him. If you're shocked by this truth, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to stay updated with the next shocking stories. Share your thoughts on Rick Harrison and these jaw-dropping revelations in the comments below. The real breakthroughs in the investigation came when agents focused on the basement of the store. The basement, which had long been off limits to the public, was the center of human trafficking activities. It was in this hidden space where children were held captive, their lives and identities erased as they were trafficked through the criminal network. With dark flickering lights and makeshift cells, the basement was a nightmare world that existed alongside the legitimate pawn shop above it. When the FBI uncovered the basement prison, it marked the beginning of an intense and larger-scale investigation. The investigative team immediately secured the area and rescued the trapped children. But as they conducted a thorough search of the basement, what they found went far beyond expectations. In addition to clear signs of human trafficking, they seized a trove of valuable documents, including financial records, communication details, and other materials that could help uncover the full scope of the criminal network behind it. The documents revealed direct involvement from officials and business owners in this trafficking operation. The deeper the FBI investigated, the more they realized that this wasn't just a small-scale crime. It was a global, sophisticated criminal organization with extensive ties. The investigation quickly expanded, forcing the FBI to collaborate closely with law enforcement agencies around the world. The international nature of the trafficking network stretched beyond U.S. borders, and the FBI worked closely with agencies in Mexico, Central America, and even Southeast Asia to track down the perpetrators. What the investigators uncovered was truly shocking. This was an organization that had been operating for years, smuggling children across borders and selling them to the highest bidders. The network wasn't limited to human trafficking. It was also involved in other illegal activities, such as selling stolen antiques, drugs, and weapons. As the investigation widened, the FBI's team focused heavily on the financial side of the operation. They traced the flow of money through a series of front companies, bank accounts, and foreign entities. The funds generated from the sale of antiques and trafficked children were funneled through complex financial channels, making it extremely difficult to trace the masterminds behind the operation. FBI forensic accountants worked tirelessly to follow the money trail from Harrison's pawn shop to the broader trafficking network. One of the most shocking revelations was the role social media and online platforms played in the human trafficking operation. The network had built an underground web where buyers could trade children, often disguised as legal transactions. These websites operated on the dark web, making them difficult to trace and allowing the organization to function almost undetected. The FBI worked with cybercrime experts to dismantle this system, but the task was incredibly difficult. The criminals had used advanced encryption and numerous hiding techniques to protect their communications and transactions. As the investigation continued, the FBI began arresting key members of the human trafficking network. While these arrests were significant, it was clear that the organization was far from being dismantled. The true masterminds were still on the run, continuing to operate the network in the shadows. The pursuit of these leaders is ongoing, but the initial wave of arrests sent a strong message. This human trafficking network is not invincible, and it will ultimately be brought to justice. One of the most challenging aspects of the investigation was working with the victims. The children rescued from the basement of Harrison's pawn shop. These children had endured unimaginable horrors, and their psychological trauma was profound. The FBI worked closely with social service agencies, psychologists, and other specialists to ensure they received the care and support they needed. This was a lengthy and difficult process, as many of the children were so traumatized they couldn't trust anyone, even those who had rescued them. The FBI, along with anti-human trafficking organizations, began the process of psychological recovery and reintegration for the children, helping them rebuild their lives. The investigation into Rick Harrison's pawn shop and the global human trafficking network operating beneath it is one of the most complex and high-profile cases the FBI has ever handled. This case involved a criminal network that spanned the globe, connected to organized crime, corrupt officials, and powerful individuals. However, the FBI's work is far from over. The investigation continues to expand, and more arrests are expected in the near future. What the FBI has uncovered is a chilling reminder of the hidden dangers within our society. Criminal networks operating openly, waiting for opportunities to profit from the vulnerabilities and suffering of others. For the victims affected by this trafficking network, both the children who have been rescued and the families torn apart by the loss of loved ones, the FBI's work is a beacon of hope in the dark. But the road to justice remains long, and the full scale of these criminal activities has yet to be fully revealed. If you want to know more shocking and untold details, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Now let's discuss in the comments what you think. And make sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss any exciting upcoming videos. The investigation into Rick Harrison's pawn shop is just the beginning, exposing only the tip of a global problem that has been quietly growing in the shadows for years. The efforts of the FBI to bring justice to the victims continue, and they know that their work is far from done. One thing is undeniable though. The criminal organization used Rick Harrison's pawn shop as a cover, and authorities are determined to dismantle this network piece by piece. When news broke that the FBI had uncovered an underground prison in the basement of Rick Harrison's pawn shop, the public was left stunned and shocked. It was hard to believe that the man who had been a familiar face on the reality TV show Pawn Stars, a hit series on the History Channel for over a decade, could be involved in such a dark and horrific activity. Television viewers who once trusted Rick Harrison as a genuine, hard-working businessman who built his career with charm and dedication now had to face the bitter truth. The man they admired was accused of being connected to one of the most heinous crimes imaginable. The consequences of this discovery unfolded almost immediately and were intensely dramatic. For those who had once enjoyed Pawn Stars and held a fondness for Rick Harrison's humble, sincere image, it felt as though the entire world had been turned upside down. The fact that over 300 children had been held captive in the basement of his pawn shop, some of them trafficked from Southeast Asia and Central America, was almost beyond comprehension. How could someone who once appeared so genuine and trustworthy on television be involved in such brutal acts? The trust between Harrison and his audience was shattered in the blink of an eye. In the hours and days following the exposure, news outlets worldwide scrambled to report on the story, each adding more shocking details. The media relentlessly covered the case, investigating Harrison's past, his financial transactions, and his connections to an international criminal network. For the first time in years, Harrison was no longer the friendly, reliable man on screen. He had become a figure of suspicion, his image permanently tarnished by the horrific accusations surrounding him. It wasn't just the media that reacted strongly, but the entire nation was in shock. People from all walks of life struggled to reconcile the vast difference between the image of Harrison on Pawn Stars and the man now accused of being at the center of a global human trafficking ring. Longtime fans of the show were heartbroken and deeply disappointed, unable to comprehend how someone they had watched hundreds of times on screen could be involved in something so vile. Social media exploded with reactions ranging from astonishment and outrage to feelings of betrayal. The hashtag #NotMaPawnster became a trend for several days as people voiced their shock. For some, this event served as a painful wake-up call, a reminder that appearances can be deceiving and those we once trusted or admired may not be who we thought they were. Many expressed feeling duped, as though Harrison had misled the public for years. This was especially hard to accept for longtime fans of the show. To them, figures like Rick Harrison, Corey Harrison, and Chumlee had become household names. Their pawn shop in Las Vegas was almost an iconic cultural landmark. The thought that a place once known for buying and selling valuable items could simultaneously be the center of one of the most horrific human trafficking operations ever uncovered was almost impossible to process. As the investigation deepened, more details continued to emerge, fueling a growing sense of betrayal among the public. According to law enforcement sources, Harrison was accused of being involved in human trafficking for years, actively assisting in the transportation of children through his shop. While there was no direct evidence linking him to kidnappings, the evidence suggested that he played a significant role in covering up the crimes as well as laundering money through his business operations. The fact that Harrison had continued to run a legitimate, successful pawn shop while quietly being involved in such a heinous plot made the truth all the more shocking. The public's reaction was not only one of anger and outrage but also fear. How could something like this happen without anyone noticing? How could someone who was once trusted and portrayed as down-to-earth on television have hidden such a dark secret for so many years? Those questions repeated in the minds of many as they tried to make sense of the horrific reality. And then people realized that this wasn't just about the actions of one individual. It was part of a much larger issue, human trafficking, an insidious problem that operates in the shadows, often unnoticed by society. In the weeks following the story's exposure, public pressure on the authorities mounted. Many called for swift and decisive action. There were voices advocating for stricter regulations on pawn shops as people began to question whether the industry was becoming a haven for criminal activity. After the scandal, lawmakers began to pay more attention to this sector, proposing measures to impose stricter controls on businesses that deal in large amounts of cash and valuable goods. Some even suggested that pawn shops should be required to report all transactions to law enforcement agencies to prevent them from being used as a front for illegal activities. Meanwhile, Rick Harrison's legal team worked tirelessly to handle the crisis. He faced numerous serious charges, including money laundering, human trafficking, and complicity in the sale of stolen antiques. The severity of the charges could potentially result in him serving decades in prison if convicted. The legal process was slow as investigators continued to gather evidence and build a case against him. The pressure on Harrison continued to grow with each new revelation, adding to the weight of the accusations hanging over him. In the eyes of the public, the biggest question remained, could Rick Harrison redeem himself? Did he have a chance to rebuild his life, or was his image permanently tarnished by the horrific crimes hidden beneath the basement of his pawn shop? In the early days after the case broke, it seemed almost impossible that Harrison could overcome this scandal. His reputation was irreparably damaged, and the public's trust was nearly shattered. However, as the investigation continued, some began to wonder whether Harrison was truly involved in the human trafficking operation or if he had simply been a pawn in a much larger criminal scheme. Although evidence suggested that he played a role in facilitating the transport of trafficked children, many questions remained unanswered. Did Harrison truly understand the full extent of the trafficking ring, or had he been unwittingly caught up in a plot that he didn't fully grasp? Was he a willing accomplice or simply a businessman exploited as a front for the criminal network? As the legal process continued to unfold, one thing became clear: this case was far from over. The discovery of the underground prison beneath Harrison's pawn shop marked the beginning of a series of events that would continue to shake the world for years to come. The public's strong and unrelenting reaction was understandable, but ultimately the law would decide whether Harrison would be held accountable for the crimes he was accused of committing. As for the victims of the trafficking ring, their road to recovery had only just begun. While many had been rescued and were receiving care and support, the investigation remained ongoing. The battle to dismantle the entire criminal network and bring all those involved to justice would continue. And the world was watching. The world is awaiting answers. And as the investigation continues, one thing is becoming increasingly clear: this case is not just about the crimes of an individual but reflects a larger issue: human trafficking and the global fight to end this brutal crime. The story of Rick Harrison, once a beloved television figure, has now taken a dark turn. But perhaps the most tragic aspect is not just the destruction of his reputation but the irreversible harm done to the lives of hundreds of innocent children. Though painful, the stories of these children are now being heard. The public outrage, legal proceedings, and ongoing investigation are all part of an effort to ensure that these children will not be forgotten and that justice will ultimately prevail. As the shock waves from the discovery of the secret basement under Rick Harrison's pawn shop begin to settle, the world shifts its focus to what will happen next. The legal battle that will determine his fate. Even though the public is still reeling from the horrific details uncovered by the FBI investigation, the media and law enforcement agencies have turned their full attention to the trial. The case against Rick Harrison is not only about determining his personal future but could also set a precedent for how authorities handle cases involving human trafficking, money laundering, and organized crime in the future. In the weeks following the revelation of the truth, Harrison's legal team has been working at full capacity, trying to construct a defense strategy that could withstand the massive amount of evidence collected by the FBI. From the moment of his arrest, Harrison has faced serious charges. He is accused of being an accomplice in an international human trafficking ring where children were moved from one region to another to be exploited and sold. The charges go beyond human trafficking. Harrison is also accused of money laundering, conspiracy, and complicity in the sale of stolen antiques. These are not light charges. If convicted, he could face decades in prison, lose his entire fortune, and carry a permanent stain on his reputation. The legal strategy his team has chosen combines denial with an attempt to reduce his responsibility. They firmly argue that Harrison had no knowledge of the full scale of the human trafficking operation running beneath his pawn shop. According to his defense lawyers, Harrison had no idea about the underground prison and was simply a pawn inadvertently used in a much larger criminal conspiracy. The core of the defense's argument is the claim that Harrison's involvement in the trafficking organization was purely accidental. They argue that he was simply running his business like anyone else, completely unaware that his shop had become a hub for criminal activities. To support this argument, Harrison's lawyers emphasize that there is no direct evidence linking him to the most egregious acts of the trafficking ring. They assert that the financial transactions discovered by the FBI are just part of the normal operations of a pawn shop and that the sale of stolen goods could happen without his prior consent or knowledge. However, the prosecution remains unconvinced by these arguments. They present a strong case showing that Harrison knowingly facilitated the movement and sale of children through his pawn shop. The prosecution highlights a series of financial and communication records gathered by the FBI, including payments Harrison received from individuals directly linked to the trafficking network. These transactions were traced back to the sale of stolen antiques and other illegal activities, with the prosecution asserting that Harrison used his pawn shop to launder money for criminal organizations. The evidence against Harrison is damning. In addition to the financial records, the FBI also uncovered a large amount of digital evidence, emails, phone call data, and surveillance footage showing that Harrison had direct contact with individuals involved in organized crime and had assisted in the trafficking of antiques, which were later used to fund the human trafficking ring. The prosecution also presented testimony from several victims rescued from the underground prison, as well as statements from former members of the trafficking network. These witnesses testify that Harrison was fully aware of what was happening and even played an active role in moving children through his shop. Despite being backed into a corner by the overwhelming evidence, Harrison continues to assert his innocence. He maintains that he had no knowledge of the full scale of the trafficking operation and is just another victim in a complex criminal conspiracy. His legal team argues that Harrison is a respected businessman who built his empire through legitimate means and that he was deceived by those around him. They also claim that the government has abused its power by charging him with such serious crimes and that the evidence is insufficient to support the trafficking and money laundering charges. As the trial approaches, the media frenzy surrounding the case intensifies. The public is divided on the issue. Some believe Harrison is a victim of circumstances, simply a pawn in a larger scheme that he had no idea about. Others are outraged at the idea that someone who had been in the public eye for so long could be involved in such heinous crimes. The trial has become a phenomenon, with reporters camping outside the courthouse waiting for the latest developments. The impact of the trial extends beyond Harrison's personal life, with broader implications for the pawnshop industry as a whole. The scandal has exposed serious flaws in how pawnshops are regulated, leading to calls for stricter oversight of the industry. Lawmakers have pushed for stronger laws to prevent businesses like Harrison's pawn shop from becoming a cover for criminal activities. Many are questioning whether the pawn industry, which deals with large amounts of cash and valuable goods, is adequately monitored. From Pawn Stars to killer, the shocking transformation of Rick Harrison. The world knew him as Rick Harrison, the sharp, quick-witted, and approachable father figure of Pawn Stars, the hit reality TV show that had millions of viewers worldwide for many years. Harrison built an empire based on a simple concept: buying and selling antiques, with each transaction carrying a promise of fascinating historical stories and unbelievable bargains. With his signature flannel shirt, glasses, and laid-back attitude, he was someone the public trusted. He was the everyman in a world full of stars, people who seemed to live in a different universe. The public loved him because he was down to earth. But behind that charming smile and the savvy business decisions, there was another side to Rick Harrison that no one could have predicted. A dark side so severe that it would ultimately destroy everything he had built. If you had asked anyone 10 years ago, they would have told you that Rick Harrison was the epitome of success, the embodiment of the American dream. A man who worked hard, climbed the ladder, and eventually reached the top. Pawn Stars was the pinnacle of his career. It was the show that turned his small pawn shop in Las Vegas into a global phenomenon. He was a TV star, a businessman, and for a long time, the face of reality TV. He had it all: wealth, fame, and a seemingly untouchable reputation. But as we now know, that reputation was nothing but an illusion, carefully constructed. Behind the public persona of this reality TV star was a web of lies, crimes, and deceit. No one could have predicted the shocking truth that would later emerge, shattering the facade of Rick Harrison's life. What happens when a man who has built his entire life on honesty and transparency in the public eye is finally caught hiding the darkest of secrets? In this story, we will dive into the incredible rise and shocking fall of Rick Harrison. We will explore how his rapid rise to fame was not only driven by smart business deals and a love for history, but was also built on a foundation of manipulation, deception, and ultimately murder. Yes, you heard that right, murder. Harrison, who made millions negotiating public deals, is accused of orchestrating the murder of a key witness, someone who had the potential to expose the truth behind Harrison's illegal transactions. This was not a simple business conflict or personal feud. This was about protecting the empire he had spent years building. Anyone who threatened to bring it all down had to be silenced. And allegedly, Harrison went to extreme lengths to ensure his criminal past would never be uncovered. But that's not all. In a confession at trial that would leave the world stunned, Harrison admitted to something even more terrifying: a woman bought for $100. This chilling statement raised many questions about the man who seemingly had everything under control. What kind of man hides such dark secrets beneath the facade of a family man, a star beloved by millions? As the truth began to emerge, the public who had once adored Rick Harrison was forced to face a shocking reality: the man they trusted had been concealing a twisted and dark past. The more the investigation unraveled, the more discoveries were made. Harrison was not just a businessman, he was a man so desperate to protect his empire that he crossed boundaries most could never imagine. He had created a fabricated story and narrative that became the foundation of his fame and fortune, but all the while he had been involved in transactions that could take him to a much darker place than anyone could have imagined. This story isn't just about a man who built a pawn shop empire, it's about how power, fame, and money can corrupt even the most seemingly innocent lives. It's the tale of how a man could win the trust of millions on national television, but in secret betray everything those people thought they knew about him. In the upcoming chapters, we will dive into Rick Harrison's rise, the shocking details surrounding his alleged involvement in the murder, and the confession that ultimately led to his world collapsing. We will explore how he manipulated the system, hid his wrongdoings, and used his reality TV fame to shield himself from the consequences of his actions. This isn't just the downfall of Rick Harrison. It's the story of how his empire, once a seemingly perfect facade, was built on lies, and when the truth was finally exposed, it was darker than anyone could have imagined. Through court documents, insider interviews, and a deep dive into the timeline of events, we will piece together this shocking story of Rick Harrison's transformation from a beloved TV star to a criminal mastermind. So join us as we reveal the untold story behind the pawn shop empire and the man who had it all until it all came crashing down. Rick Harrison wasn't always the household name that fans of Pawn Stars know today. Like many success stories, the road to fame and fortune was filled with hard work, determination, and a bit of luck. Born in 1965 in Las Vegas, Nevada, Rick grew up in a city known for its neon lights and the allure of quick wealth. Las Vegas, where fortunes could be made and lost overnight, would play a significant role in shaping Harrison's life. Growing up in a military family, Rick's childhood was anything but glamorous. His father, Richard Benjamin Harrison Jr., a Navy veteran, ran a small pawn shop that was struggling. From an early age, Rick was exposed to the world of buying, bargaining, and negotiating, learning the basics of the pawn business through careful observation. However, like many teenagers, Rick wasn't immediately drawn to the family business. Instead, he dreamt of something bigger. Rick attended high school in Las Vegas, but later dropped out, not realizing that his future would be closely tied to the industry he had once overlooked, music. Harrison's first venture into the business world came when he opened the gold and silver pawn shop. However, the path to success wasn't easy right from the start. His first attempt at running a pawn shop faced numerous challenges. Rick didn't have formal training and his learning curve was steep, yet he had one thing many didn't: a strong work ethic and a keen eye. He spent enough time observing his father's work to learn how to make deals, spot valuable items, and interact with customers in a way that made them feel at ease and willing to negotiate. Before long, Rick began turning a profit, and his small pawn shop in Las Vegas began attracting attention. However, it was still far from the empire it would eventually become. In fact, for many years his shop barely survived, with Rick relying on a combination of hard work and determination to keep it afloat. There were times when the future of his pawn shop seemed uncertain, but his knack for spotting a good deal and his passion for the business ultimately helped him succeed. Music. The turning point came in 2009 with the debut of Pawn Stars. At the time, reality TV was exploding with shows about quirky characters and unusual professions. The idea of a show about a pawn shop wasn't groundbreaking, but it was the unique personalities of the people involved that would make the show stand out. It wasn't just about the items being bought and sold, it was about the people behind the counter, and that's where Rick Harrison shone. The concept of Pawn Stars was simple: follow the daily operations of a pawn shop and the colorful characters who walk through its doors. The show not only introduced Rick Harrison but also his father, Richard Harrison, nicknamed the Old Man, and his son Corey Harrison, nicknamed Big Hose. Together they formed a family unit that viewers could easily relate to. The chemistry between the three men was undeniable, with each bringing something special to the table: Rick's calm demeanor and business acumen, his father's tough